just out of reach beyond the edge of reality, mysterious forces underlie the fabric of existence. Energematrice6, the very energy of creation, serves as both the elixir of life and the arsenal of destruction for its human and not-so-human denizens.
Crushing darkness, whose source they cannot fathom, grips the cosmos and its people. In anguish, they dream of the long-foretold Brightstar.
Join us as we embark on an epic journey, exploring the universe of Energematrice 6.
There we go. And we're live, and this is the Energematrice6 podcast, and we are on episode 18 now, I think.
Yep,
And
I think so.
welcome, everybody. Glad to be here today. Thank you, Mel. We have second and first, oldest and second here today to record their parts. We're on... Quit smirking at me. We're on Genesis of a Dark Age, the first story in From the Void. And we stopped about halfway through last week. So I think that's... I guess we better do the V for V ad real quick.
Okay.
The Energematrice6 podcast operates on a value-for-value model. That means that we hope if we provide some value to you in your life, that you'll return that to us in whatever way you can manage. If you're interested, head over to e6universe.com and sign up for our email list to get our free ebooks, and hopefully buy a physical book or some merch while you're there. Or if all you can manage right now is to leave us a good review somewhere, 5 stars or some kind of positive rating, that's more than appreciated. Thank you. All right. And with that, let's get to it.
All right.
Ready when you are, Mel.
All right. Annie, on the other hand, relaxed, and her attention fixed on this new speaker, as if she had finally found what she was looking for.
Who asked you, ratting? Stegler ground out between...
Old habits.
Yeah, no kidding. Go for it.
Stegler ground out between clenched teeth. Paul snorted again, this time in amusement, and raised a hand in greeting.
Seaver, it's good to see you. Can always count on you for a dose of honesty.
Seaver Ratting snorted in turn. His face twisted in disgust, but his eyes twinkled.
Not much good to be found around here, that's for certain. Seeing you is an improvement, though.
The admission was grudging, though he did send a smile in Paul's direction. One of the council grumbled.
Why'd you have to let him in?
Paul stared the man down, but before he could speak, Ratting's glare once more assaulted the council, and the twinkle in his eyes turned dark.
These fools strutting around in their brand new dresses, claiming they have the right to tell everybody what to do. What does telestry even mean, eh, Stegler? Telestry?
Paul raised an eyebrow, looking around at the council, who shuffled sheepishly. A few folded their hands behind their backs to hide the lace edging the sleeves of their... A few folded their hands behind their backs to hide the lace edging the sleeves of their robes. That lace had to have come with them. Let me try that again because it's a
Yeah, you're good.
page over on my iPad. That lace had to have come with them from Earth in someone's personal luggage. Ateria couldn't produce such things yet, certainly not in any quantity. Stegler's mouth turned down at the corners in distaste, but he answered quickly enough.
It was all we could think of, Paul. The Telestry's an advisory council to consider the effects of Energematrice 6 and technology upon the population as a whole. The robes were your idea.
Ratting smirked triumphantly.
And you went along.
Stegler shot back. He shook his head in frustration and turned to face Paul squarely.
Even Seaver was worried enough about the situation to join as a founding member of the council, Paul. This is deadly serious.
It was Ratting's turn to look uncomfortable, and he nodded grudgingly.
Somebody had to keep an eye on you. I don't trust you, Stegler.
Stegler shook his head, exasperated, then looked back to Paul.
Something has to be done. You are the only hope we have left. The people are ready to destroy every scrap of technology we brought with us. Without Lastus or some other handy target, they're blaming Energematrice 6 for what happened on Earth. Any technology we brought here is fair game. They've already started wrecking whatever they can lay their hands on. Luddites.
The grumble came from somewhere in the knot of the council members. The grumble came from somewhere in the knot of council members. They all held the same sentiment. Annie was pulling on Rachel's sleeve and pointing once more, and Rachel focused again to see. Was that a hole? The monster, whatever it was, had apparently dug a hole under the edge of the barrier, and she looked over at it just in time to see it pop up under the barrier, a triumphant look on its ugly face, before it started determinedly toward them. Stumbling on that one. Before it started determinedly toward them, fading away once more. Paul considered Stegler for a long moment, then asked,
If I told you 5 ships full of Lastus goons were preparing to descend on Ateria, would that change anything?
It was then that Rachel decided she had to do something to stop the creature herself. She stopped paying attention to the conversation and focused, creating a bubble of blue power, invisible to the naked eye, around the entire little cluster of the middle... around the entire little cluster in the middle of Paul's larger clearing. Blue was her specialty, and it was perfect for stopping physical motion. Seaver was only just inside the bubble, but it should be enough. When she looked up, she caught a sharp glance from both Seaver and Paul, but Stegler was still talking.
Are you certain?
He seemed taken aback. Paul sighed, once more giving the council his attention.
No, there's no indication of that yet.
He shook his head.
But there may be worse things out there even than Lastus Rowland.
As if on cue, the little monster bounced bodily off the shield Rachel had been constructing, becoming visible not just through Energematrice 6, but to her physical eyes as well. It let out a snarl that sounded like it was gargling gravel and reared back to punch her shield, with a fist that looked like a small boulder. Paul and the council stared at it in shock, but Seaver Ratting must have noticed something before it actually reached the shield, because she felt his power reaching out to seize the thing. Whatever it was, whatever it was sensed Seaver's power before it coalesced fully, and it leaped straight at him. Annie moved unexpectedly, and when Rachel looked at Annie moved unexpectedly, and when Rachel looked down, the little girl was up and running toward Seaver. Rachel caught a scared, determined look on her face. Then she passed through Rachel's bubble, and, because she hadn't designed it to withstand impacts from the inside, the shield burst. After that, everything happened at once. The monster, barely chest high on Seaver, lunged for him. Annie passed directly behind it, and Rachel caught a flash of Annie passed directly behind it, and Rachel caught a flash of something shiny from the little girl's closed fist as she punched the monster in its back, as high as she could reach. Seaver blasted the thing backward with a gout of Energematrice 6. It flew through the space Annie had just been occupying as the little girl stopped short in her run and turned to grab around Seaver's leg. Rachel blinked, and Paul and the council came to life once more, breaking through their shock.
What in blazes? Voids, what is that?
It was a good question. Now that the monster was stunned or dead, it was clearly visible. It had lumpy gray skin that might have been made of rock or clay based on the texture. The arms and legs seemed too long for its body, splayed out across the ground as they were. By far its most arresting feature was the eyes, huge, black, and almost flat. They stared lifelessly, for it was almost certainly dead, based on the green slime that coated its torso, oozing from a great gash in the middle of its lower back. Rachel shot a look at Annie, still clinging to Seaver's leg. Nobody inside the clearing besides her and John had been in a position to see what the little girl had done when she was behind it. What was that flash she'd seen? It could have been a knife, but how could such a small child effectively stab something like that? And Rachel would have sworn she had no knife before. Paul held up a hand for calm, walking toward the strange creature, now collapsed on the ground in what could almost be mistaken for a heap of rock and gray mud.
Did you arrange that, old friend, as a demonstration?
He looked at Seaver Ratting, somewhere between amused and curious. The crowd, meanwhile, was obviously confused. The entire incident had only taken perhaps 3 seconds, and even Rachel, who had been looking right at it the whole time, wasn't sure what she'd seen. Seaver laughed and shook his head.
Wasn't my doing.
He shot a sharp glance down at the tiny girl still clinging to his leg. The rest of the council paid Annie no mind at all, pointing at the thing and gabbling like geese. With a twinge of disgust, Rachel wondered what they had... With a twinge of disgust, Rachel wondered what they would have done without Seaver or Annie, or even her. Died one by one, probably, she thought.
As you see,
Paul addressed them sternly.
there are more things than we know lurking out in the darkness of space.
Rachel snorted. Eteria was far from the darkness of space. Paul sent her a quelling look, though, and she held her tongue. Ratting still standing several... It's a tongue twister. Ratting, still standing several paces back from the council, let out a sharp laugh.
Even you haven't seen the worst of it yet, Paul.
Paul glanced over at Ratting. No, that's not what that says. Paul glanced over to Ratting, his expression grave, and asked,
Why? What have you seen, old friend? Other than that, I mean.
Ratting opened his mouth. Let me get a sip of water.
Yeah, you're good.
tried to go down the wrong way.
Take your
That's good
time.
timing.
We've got
Give me
time.
just a second. Okay. Writing. That didn't come out good. Sorry, give me just a second.
You're good. No, take your time. This is not a big deal. Take your time.
Okay. It's testing it out. Doesn't take much, just a little bit going down the wrong way.
I know.
All right. Sorry for all the throat clearing.
No, you're fine. Do what you need to do. I'll cut it all out, and nobody will ever know, except the live
Okay.
audience. But I don't know that we have one right now.
Right.
Either way, though, it's cool.
All right, give me just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try that again.
Okay.
Okay. Ratting opened his. No, it's just like
Yep.
it's struggling.
No, I got it. Well, when you do that, it's like it gets caught there, and then
I know.
it's like
I
you
think the
almost
more
have
I
to
try to
talk
talk,
for
the
it. Well,
better.
right, exactly. You have to talk for
Yeah.
a minute, and then it'll actually go away. So, yeah, no, I
It was
get
sunny
it.
today here too, so there's been allergies today. So I was like, I I did what I could to prepare, but
Yeah, no, I get it.
it's
Well,
checking
and
me.
it's one of those things. We have bad enough allergens here. I can't imagine how bad it'd be there. You're in a
Oh,
much
it's
warmer,
awful.
more, yeah, no, and I have pretty serious seasonal allergies, so I totally get it.
Yeah, I didn't have too bad of allergies until I got into my 30s, but after that it just got rough.
It's,
Okay.
yeah. All right.
We'll see. We'll see.
Try
We'll give
again?
this another try.
All
Yeah.
right.
We'll give it another try. Ratting opened his mouth to answer, then seemed to think better of what he was. It was just a ramp up. We'll give it
Nope,
another
you're
go
good.
now. Ratting opened his mouth to answer, then seemed to. Ratting opened his mouth to answer, then seemed to think better of what he'd been about to say. Instead, he shook his head and grimaced, as if from some sort of internal pain. He looked Paul directly in the eye and spoke.
From the void they come, beyond the edge of the real, untouched by the power of creation, inimical to light.
Everyone knew Seaver was some sort of mystic or prophet. Not many ever got to see exactly what that meant, however. His words obviously some sort of prophetic His words, obviously some sort of prophetic utterance, had stilled the council. Seaver's hand rested on Annie's shoulder, and his attitude was once more that of a crotchety old man when he spoke again.
The situation here sucks, but they have no idea what you're fighting. Me, I've seen it.
With that, Ratting turned and pulled Annie a dozen paces off to one side, sitting down in the grass as she perched beside him. Paul was staring at his friend when Stegler finally spoke, half strangled.
Well, if you must go, will you? Will you at least advise us before you leave? Or speak to the people?
He gestured at the surrounding crowd, now beginning to slowly disperse. Apparently, only the front ranks had seen what happened with the strange monster. Some few still stared transfixed at the odd lump on the grass. Paul chuckled dryly, without humor, then nodded.
Give them what they want.
Stegler looked like a deer in headlights. Stegler looked like a deer in the headlights of an oncoming vehicle.
But we'll starve.
Paul shook his head.
You said the Telestry is a council to advise them on the effect of Energematrice 6 and technology. So advise them.
Stegler shook his head in turn.
We've told them the technology's necessary. They won't listen.
Paul closed his eyes and shook his head.
Not all of it. Let them destroy the Energematrice 6 technology. Every one of you has the gene. You can use the power yourselves. Preserve the necessary tech. The old tech. Let the rest go.
He scowled. He scowled at them.
Now leave us in peace. We'll be outbound again after lunch.
Stegler thought over Paul's suggestion for a moment, then he nodded. No, that's not right. Stegler thought over Paul's suggestion for a moment, then nodded slowly.
I suppose. Yes, we may be able to do that.
He blinked.
If there were no If there were no E6 machines, if humans were only able to use Energematrice 6 by their own power, what would the universe be like?
Paul looked as if he'd bitten something sour, as if he could imagine what that might be like, and didn't like it, but he shrugged.
Needs of the moment.
Then, Paul turned to the crowd and once more spoke through weaves of power that amplified his voice.
The council's deliberation is complete. Please return to your homes. They have reached a decision and will announce it to you within the day. I bid you farewell, people of Eteria.
One by one, the council paid their respects and turned to straggle away with the crowd. As they trudged down the hill, Paul spoke once more to their retreating backs.
I cannot be your king. I may at best be your advisor. At worst, a guardian against the darkness.
He eyed the strange form still laying on the grass. Watching them walk down the hill, a little knot of gray robes among the rest of the crowd, Rachel asked, "What about Seaver?" Paul nodded, and all three rose to walk over to the bent. Paul nodded, and all three rose to walk over to the bent, crooked form of Seaver Ratting, staring into the distance from where he sat on the hillside next to the small girl. She grinned up at Rachel as they approached.
Found Seaver!
She looked over at the strange corpse.
And a monster. I scared the others away too.
Her obvious pride at this announcement left Paul frowning. Obviously, he didn't understand the role she'd played in the little drama. Rachel wasn't sure she fully understood it either, after seeing the gaping wound in the monster's back. Seaver smiled crookedly at Annie, fondness softening his craggy features. Paul asked,
Are you all right, old friend?
Seaver shrugged.
It never touched me. What was it?
Paul's curiosity, never deeply buried, came to the fore.
A monster!
Annie's delighted giggle brought involuntary smiles to everyone's faces.
And it doesn't like Energematrice. Seaver needs to be careful.
Paul frowned, taking a moment to parse Annie's pronunciation of Energematrice 6, then raised an eyebrow at Seaver in question.
Golem.
Seaver's monosyllable Seaver's monosyllabic reply was disgusted, almost dismissive. At Paul's expectant silence, he sighed and added,
They are resistant to Energematrice 6, she's right. And bloody hard to see unless they want to be.
Paul asked.
Should I stay?
Seaver laughed.
They mostly leave us alone. Took a disliking to me a while back. She's right about that, too.
He glanced ruefully over at Annie, who turned to hug him tightly.
What about her?
Paul asked. Seaver laughed, patting the little girl on the back.
Stray. Found her and took her in. We're good for each other.
Paul nodded, accepting the explanation without question.
Well, she needs to be careful. That thing could have hurt her. Yes, it could.
Seaver gave Annie a look, and Rachel couldn't help but see the layers of meaning in the statement. Her dad still had no idea that it was Annie rather than Seaver who had dispatched the creature. Rachel snorted, about to speak up and expose the little charade, but Annie gave her a conspiratorial grin, and she thought better of it. A glance at John's expression confirmed her decision. He agreed. It wasn't their secret to tell. Soon, Seaver and Annie said their own goodbyes and headed off down Soon, Seaver and Annie said their own goodbyes and headed off down the hill toward Cassisia City, leaving Paul, John, and Rachel to continue their long-interrupted picnic. It felt a little strange to simply sit back down and pick up where they'd left off, but Rachel found herself a bit amused as well. After a few bites, she asked, "Why'd we come back anyway, Dad?" Paul sighed.
I should say it was to check on them, but the real answer? I came back because I missed the sky. We weren't made for the void, and you shouldn't have to grow up in darkness.
Rachel's reply came out far... Let me get a sip of water.
Mm-hmm.
Try not to choke on it this time. Rachel's reply came out far more grumpy than she'd intended, but it fit her mood. Yeah, but dealing with people is complicated. Paul chuckled and nodded, then smiled crookedly over at her.
Without other people, we'd go crazy. People are important, even if they are complicated.
Rachel snorted. Shrew Tongue is enough to drive me crazy all by herself. Paul scowled at her.
I told you to leave Matilda alone, Rachel.
Then more gently.
She's just trying to help. Lightmaker knows we get little enough of that.
Rachel bit back a retort with some difficulty. Her dad deserved better from her than a vented spleen. She wasn't really angry at him anyway. Paul was the best dad she could imagine, though everything had... Through. Paul was the best dad she could imagine, through everything that had happened to them. Did I read that right?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. She didn't really know why she was angry. She had been since they left Earth, but it wasn't fair to aim it at her dad. However much she wanted to sometimes. Maybe the thought of having Annie as a little sister had set it off again, she thought. They finished their lunch in silence, enjoying the cool, fresh breeze and the beauty of the world around them. Rachel's initial instinct to pout slowly subsided. She still didn't like Shrew Tongue Matheson, but she couldn't help thinking to herself about the picnic. There was something about the blue sky. There was something about this this round part that gave it space could. As they were packing up, John asked Mark to leave them a piece. As
I think it's your line.
Are they going to have enough food, Dad? Are they going to have enough food, Dad?
Paul considered a moment, then shrugged.
I know you were young when we landed.
His mouth twisted in a wry acknowledgement of John's apparent lack of aging, but he continued without pausing.
When we first got here, there were plenty of plants, just nothing we could eat. We brought enough seed stock with us, though, that if they're careful, they should be fine. All the earth plants grow well enough here. If they use their resources right, basic earth tech is enough to feed them.
It was with some reluctance that they re-entered Hope and lifted off once more into the skies of Eteria, and from there to the blackness of space beyond. Paul, John, and Rachel all sat in silence in Hope's command center until the Retton drive cut in. Gravity returned. So, we're read. Oh, that was really fast. Got confused. Sorry.
You're good.
Paul gave her a sidelong briefly. Rachel sighed. And Rachel said, we can't even work with the matter transistor properly. Let me say that one again. We can't even work with the transistor properly there. Paul Sorry. Paul frowned and answered.
Our comms are going a little robotic here too, so don't worry about it. And for those of you who are live, you may just have to catch the finished version. We do get a full quality upload as we're doing this, so one way or another, we'll get the high quality version out and done. Anyway, when you're ready, Mel, go ahead and hit it again. And we lost Mel. This is turning into a more exciting recording than I had hoped.
Oh no. So my internet cut out entirely.
Yeah, you know what?
I don't know what that's going to do to the upload.
I don't know. We'll find out.
All right. Do we want to continue where we left off, or?
Yeah, let's go ahead and finish up, and then we'll see after that.
Okay. Let me find my place again. So we're going to the redoubt. Paul gave
And what, Dad?
John asked when it was clear that Paul wasn't going to continue.
I'm worried it might be more like a funnel than just leaving a trace behind.
He looked at them soberly.
I'm even more worried that if anybody else came through, it would warp even more.
It took a moment for both of them to digest Paul's statement, and John's reply was puzzled, almost dubious.
Dad, You remember what you said when we were watching that old Earth science fiction show the other day and they ripped a hole into subspace?
Paul grinned at him.
Yeah, I know. Everything's moving through space so fast that if it were actual damage to the fabric of space, we'd leave it behind instantly. We can't even tell how fast we're really moving because there's no fixed reference point.
So what then? Rachel knew her skepticism was obvious, but she couldn't help it. Paul grimaced, groping for the words he needed to express what was... Paul grimaced, groping for the words he needed to express what he was thinking.
What I'm trying to describe is more complicated than just a hole in space. It's more like a portal. When we came back through, however we got here, we created an off-ramp back into reality that was anchored to whatever real things were around us. We shouldn't even have been able to get back at all, you realize. I tried twice before it ever worked. I could sense reality everywhere, but we were caught on the other side, and I couldn't get us back. It was the readout that I caught hold of, the third time I tried. The question is how, or who.
This time when Paul fell silent, neither John nor Rachel interrupted his thoughts.
And that concludes that. So, real quick before we go, I wanted to mention one thing, it's sort of on my mind here. In a few weeks, we need somebody to read Tom Nelian, the boy from the darkness and the boy from the megalith. He also has a small part in the Veil of Mysteries, which is the next book in the series. So if anybody's interested, you gotta let us know as soon as possible. I want a separate reader specifically for Tom, and I want him to be able to narrate for the next, well, not the next stories, but in a few stories, we've got 2 by Tom Nelian, or 2 from his perspective, and I want somebody to narrate for those. So if somebody's interested, let me know. I would love to have somebody join us for that. And with that said, thank you, Mel. I appreciate it. And thank you, Oldest. Thank you, Second. Good job, everybody. And we will catch everybody next week.
Thanks all.